Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's AAIS webinar. My name is Werner Kruck. I'm the President and CEO of AAIS. Today, we're going to be taking a look at AI exploitations, how P&C insurers can protect themselves. I'm joined by Todd Kozikowski, CEO of Forewarn, and Joseph Petrelli, President of Demotech. Together, we will discuss how AI is transforming the insurance landscape, but not always for the better. With my guests, we hope to provide practical guidance for identifying areas of exposure, implementing internal safeguards, and staying ahead of AI-driven threats. Joe and Todd, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Warner. Wonderful to be with you and everyone on this webinar, and great to return.
Good to see everyone.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Todd. Just a quick reminder for our audience. We want to encourage you to engage with us throughout today's discussion, so be sure to submit your questions using the Zoom Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will keep an eye out and try to address them as you submit them. Those we don't get to, we will do our best to address at the end of today's discussion when we conclude with our live Q&A portion. With that, I'd like to start and pass it over to Joe to tell the story of how we got where we got.
Thank you, Werner. Yeah, I think what I'd like to do, just spend a minute. The way Demotech currently reviews and rates about 460 companies coast to coast in the U.S. And we got involved in regional insurance company ratings back in 1989. 1996, we were invited by the state of Florida to develop a process to assist them depopulate the Joint Underwriting Association. So we were involved in Florida from 1996 to date. So in about 2020, when the 8 carriers on this list just dropped off the edge of the table and failed, including American Capital Assurance Corp., which was dual rated, we decided that we needed to do an internal review of our process because we had had tremendous success in the past. And so we looked at the regulatory structure. OIR has its own financial statements every quarter, and they also have their own catastrophe stress tests that they applied to carriers. And we had catastrophe stress tests and catastrophe reinsurance requirements. And if you go back even to 2004, 2005, I think there were 16 named events in those 2 years in Florida. Not a single Demotech rated carrier failed. So when these carriers fell off the table in 2020, we had to figure out what was going on. Looked back over a 10-year period, independent audits were unqualified. Actuarial opinions, which address both growth loss reserves, including reinsurance, and net reserves after reinsurance, determinations of reasonable provision every year prior to the year of failure. Cat reinsurance, they were purchasing the right cat reinsurance, and when carriers did need to make capital contributions during that 10-year period that I looked back, they made them. And the quarterly analysis process we used, it was also consistently applied. And we look back and we know there were certain things going on in Florida. We know the Florida Office of Insurance Regulation had its semi-annual reports related to the disproportionate levels of property insurance claims in Florida. I think at one point, rough cuts, 8% of the homeowners insurance claims in the country, but 75% of the homeowners insurance litigation in the country. That existed throughout this entire time period prior to the insolvencies. One-way attorney fees, those were there as well. And then there were a few court cases, Johnson, Sebo, and Joyce cases. But the point of it is that this went on, and we look back 10 years, everything that was in place when these carriers fell off the table and went insolvent had been there for 10 years. And the other thing that we had is, there's a graph coming up. Our track record on solvency was all but identical on a gross impairment rate to that of AM Best. So even when American Capital Assurance, being dual rated, failed, we still were struck by what had happened. So one of the things I wanted to look at was the composition of reported claims at first report for the accident year. So if you're familiar with Schedule P Part 5, there's sections in there. There's homeowners, farm owners, there's private passenger auto, there's commercial auto. These are the claims reported as of 12 months in the accident year, as of 24 months, and all the way out. So that you can see as claims get reported over time, you will see the count of claims grow. Well, what we looked at here, we took the Schedule P data of the companies, and Schedule P claim count data has total reported, total outstanding, and total that have had a payment made on it. So if you subtract the outstanding and the claims with a payment from the reported, you will get the claims closed without a payment. So those are the three graphs that we saw, and we graphed each of them as of 12 months, as of first report. And what you see happening over time is the number of claims closed with the payment, that top line, tends to go down. The number of claims closed without a payment, the middle, tends to go up, and the outstanding also tends to climb. What this told us is that something had been happening in the reporting of claims. One of the things you don't know in Schedule P Part 5 is if a claim's outstanding, you do not know if it's litigated or if you haven't gotten to it yet. And what I saw when I saw this graph was because the number of claims closed without a payment was trending up, and because the outstanding claims were trending up, it was almost a natural consequences that the claims paid with a payment, those claims trended down because we were spending more time on the other things. So the next graph you will see is we did a little more digging, and we found at the CFO's website the new annual litigated claims. And if you see that chart there, 2018, 2019, 2020, those are the new annual litigated claims of the carriers that failed. That is not cumulative. That is new claims by year. And you can see that it's taking off like a rocket. That little red line down at the bottom, that is the 3% market share. The 3% market share based on premium of the companies that failed. There were some OIR reports put out beyond our study in 2024. There are some OIR data, and the claims reported for these companies with a 3% market share, they had 16% of the litigated claims in Florida. So you always had billboards, you always had door knocking, you always had TV and radio. So we're trying to figure out something had to be going on here, and we figured it was technology. And that's when I said to myself, there's only one guy I'm going to call about this. He's a friend. I'd known him about 10 years. He understands technology. He's been involved in insurance. So I sent Todd a quick note, said, hey, Todd, give me a call. It'll be a lot easier to get through this. I've got a research project I want to discuss. So Werner, you were boots on the ground during this period of time before we transitioned to Todd.
Yeah, and I can identify with your desire to go back and say what happened. I was in charge of product for a company who had over 40 years of product experience, and I've been through ups and downs and cycles, and I thought I was pretty competent at what I was doing. And we went from doing well to all of a sudden we're upside down. I remember thinking, what did I miss? How did we get here? This is my responsibility. And it was scary, and it was disappointing. And so I'm glad to know that there was something else going on that was new. So the other thing I think about as we talk about Florida, we maybe have viewers on that are saying, "Boy, I'm sure glad I'm not in Florida," and you might feel a little bit comfortable with that. What I think we've seen in the past 5 years is a lot of the things that we saw in Florida are cropping up in one form or another on a countrywide basis. So so I think the Florida experience And a lot of things we've learned is instructive. And Todd, uh, what's going on and what do we do about it?
Yeah, thanks so much, Warner. And it's a pleasure to be here. And, certainly this has been quite a remarkable period of time, frankly, for myself and the team at Forewarn, and of course, what Joe had shared prior to. The industry is completely changing. We're seeing not just the notion of what we call tech-enabled claim instigation, but the rise of AI and how AI is being used as the next attack surface. And what we'll talk about is not just the receipts or the fake doctored images, the MRI images. We're going to talk about fundamentally how is the internet actually changing as a result of AI and how it can be exploited in search and in other ways to really drive new forms of opportunism and fraud. And so what we'll talk about is just how do companies, one, detect this? How do they respond to it cross-departmentally? Because this isn't just an IT issue. This isn't just a cyber issue. This is a broad issue that affects each department, and each department has a response to this. So we'll break down this information. For some of you who have attended the annual event back in the spring, I will share some of the similar information. We have new images and analytics and data that we'll be highlighting today. But certainly what you know is we often provide a lot of information, so we'll break it down into some of the parts here to make it digestible. So Forewarn was started out of the insights and the analysis from Demotech of the failed insurers. Why did they become financially insolvent? And so Forewarn started as a result of this a few years ago. Many of us are former engineers, data scientists. We were in the insurance industry. We've been in multiple industries. But part of the work that we have done has led to the birth and the creation of relationships with a number of organizations, including the National Insurance Crime Bureau, of course, AAIS. But we've also started to work with a number of departments of insurance and the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud as well. And part of this has been not just a regulatory response, but actually in some cases a law enforcement response, both locally, nationally, federally, including the FBI, as well as multiple federal agencies in the cyber side. Because what we have detected and will share today is nation-state sponsored cyber criminal organizations for hire by some of the very law firms targeting carriers are being used, and show some of those connections and those relationships. This is a very different type of risk. And where traditional cyber looks inward, what we look at is what's developing in the attack surface before it becomes a claim, before it becomes a first notice of loss. We started this work by just simply understanding from many organizations from top down and across their challenges. And some of these that you'll hear may be things that you have even said. If it's a claim, it's too late. How do we go up the pipeline to understand how did it get started? How did they solicit that sanctified relationship between the policyholder and the insurance company? How did they intercept that and take advantage? AI, as we said, is changing everything beyond just fake pictures and fraud. We're going to show how those tools can be used to be creating new forms of manipulation. Litigation funding groups. This is something 10 years ago was just kind of brewing. We had the birth of social inflation. We had the growth of more and more third-party litigation funders. But understanding who on the other side that you're facing, how they're funded, what resources, what connections, what networks are they a part of. This is a very different type of, again, attack surface. And we often heard from folks, geez, we just simply need a better warning system, not just for the claims team, but across the organization. How do we detect and see these activities that are emerging? And most importantly, as we were saying, the social inflation definition, by its nature, every one of us has a different interpretation or a slightly different version. And we'll share ours here at Forewarn when we think of how this got started and some of the early stages of what we thought of as social inflation. To us, it was kind of a combination of items. You had third-party litigation funding. Again, I don't think any of us had ever expected that lawyers would be pawns to a financial chessboard. But here we are. We saw the increase in litigation platforms and AI-driven platforms to optimize and calibrate what judge, what jurisdiction, what past settlement amount, and where do we try a case for the best outcome. We started to see, of course, higher and higher settlement amounts and nuclear awards. And of course, none of this can happen without a claimant name. And beyond to like what Joe was saying, it was more than just billboards and TV and radio commercials. The more exacting way to find somebody is in search and in digital ads and in search manipulation, one of the ways to get a claimant name. And we're going to show how that led to the growth of loss adjustment expense and other items. But where it's headed is what we're going to talk about today. And what we're going to show is synthetic websites that mimic your brand. We'll show how they're using bots to test different elements of creating claims at a low cost but high volume approach. We'll talk about those new attack surfaces, including black hat SEO and various tactics to be able to drive and escalate in a much faster and cheaper way. And they're hard to detect. And I think that's the other element of this, because the propagation of fraud and the propagation of these attack surfaces is really sophisticated. Oftentimes, when we look at a claim that comes in, oftentimes it starts by some type of exploitation or compromise of a digital system. It might be AI manipulation or SEO or some type of impersonation. It gets amplified. Maybe there are other collusive networks involved. We see it get replicated, even shared and told as playbooks in the dark web, and then it becomes a systemic risk for the organization and frankly across the enterprise. And this is where this becomes a challenge, not just for insurers, but also reinsurers. How do we better predict and understand this type of risk? So below that, we'll talk about some of the elements that Forewarn's part of in terms of helping to identify and detect and also help mitigate and measure the response behind this. But each organization has a responsibility to being able to identify these steps in the best concerted way. So what I'd like to do is first start with a definition. Many of you are familiar with SEO, search engine optimization, but I like to use this as the foundation because it's usually how this has evolved in the last 5 years, especially with AI as an attack surface. So SEO is just nothing more than how do we get traffic to our website? There's really one of two ways. One is that we can organically get traffic to our site by creating keywords, content, blog articles, FAQs, everything that your organization marketing department probably does today, with the idea that if we do this well and we structure this content well, we can page rank and have a good showing in search results. The other side of this is we can buy it through pay-per-click advertising, and that gives us a jump start in our search results page right at the top of the screen. Just coincidence, by the way, last year, $190 billion was spent in search advertising. To compare that to billboards were about $7 billion. So we're talking orders of magnitude difference with digital search spend on this. What we're going to talk about, though, is what happens when bad actors inject content for nefarious purposes. What happens when they manipulate content in those ads or manipulate content that's organically ranking to outrank your own branded content? What if they used your brand as part of that process to create a different type of exploitation? And that's what we started to see. So turning it back to when Joe had reached out to me in March of 2022, we were beginning to investigate public adjusters in Florida. And in this one particular case, we were investigating a public adjuster who was bidding on 1,200 keywords, spending $650,000 to generate 3,700 clicks, and targeting very specific insurance companies and even mobile homeowners in Louisiana. And right then and there, we just had to pause. And I turned to Joe and I said, Joe, what public adjuster do you know spends that much money? This is an individual. This isn't a team, a company, an organization. This is one person spending this much money on just pay-per-click advertising. There's a business model behind this. As we started to investigate, we started to look at the solicitation of individuals online. And specifically, one of the areas that we had uncovered, and there were dozens that we found, but one of them was to outrank for the claims department phone number. So you think about it, when a tree falls on a home and we're in a time of stress, we may not have that phone number available on our cell phone. So we might turn to the internet. We might turn to search to run a search for the claims department phone number. And what we started to learn was how there were opportunists already outranking for the insurance company's claims department number. What was interesting is you could do that search from the headquarters, and of course they'd rank high. But if you ran that search 3 or 4 zip codes down the street, it was a completely different set of results. Why? Because search is very geo-dependent. And the opportunists were smart enough to figure that out and redirect folks. And so we would call the number and they'd say, "Hi, we're company XYZ claims department." And we'd say, "Are you company XYZ?" And they'd reassure us that they were the claims department. And we'd say, "Are you sure? Are you company XYZ?" And then click. And we get this again and again and again. And what we started to really begin to uncover was the fact that we started to see first notice of loss when storms hadn't even hit the coast. This was the case in Hurricane Idalia, not a particularly large storm, but we had our first clients at that time in Florida. And they were coming to us saying, "Hey, Todd, we have our first lawsuits, and yet the storm is still several days away. How is that possible?" And it was possible because we started to see opportunists who were putting up websites saying, "File your lawsuit now so you're first in line and that you can get paid first as well." And so we started to see these elements. The second one was in Maui, just 48 hours after we saw out-of-state attorneys soliciting illegally in the state, which is an illegal law. You're not allowed to do that. But they were also setting up sites, bidding, and also, of course, establishing lawsuits within the first 48 hours. So we had seen a lot of activity. By the time Mosley hit, which many of us are familiar with in Texas, we were calibrating our models, and we had started to see a trend in behavior from this activity of here was a law firm who took in $40 million, 14 of it spent on this type of digital marketing targeting. And what was remarkable was we believed there were people's names who were on lawsuits who had no idea. And of course, the story broke in a really incredible way. For those who are not familiar with this case, certainly go back and take a look. But this was one of the areas where we were now calibrating our models. Today, $114 represents the going click rate for a Los Angeles fire attorney. And certainly there are lots of ads, there's lots of digital advertising. None of what you see here is technically illegal. But what we are concerned about is what you don't see. It's not what you see, it's what you don't see that concerns us. And what we don't see behind the scenes, and this to give you a sense, large national consumer brands like Starbucks, Ford, McDonald's, they spend on average about $300,000 a month each to be able to promote a product or a service. A large national law firm might spend $3.2 million a month to be able to advertise their law firm, their targeting and such. And so we're looking at now law firms, thousands of them, that are spending an upwards of order of $20 to $30 million a year to target very specific companies, including insurance companies. And this has really created a whole new level of risk for organizations and for the insurance industry. To put this into more detail, this is one law firm that uses those two techniques of organic search to be able to generate over 200,000 clicks in 1 month. And at the same time, they pay nearly $2 million to generate an additional 15,000 clicks that are highly targeted, all with the notion of being able to target over 100 companies. We had to hide the names of those companies from this company, but what you're seeing is a topologistics chart. This is a term that Forewarn uses to show the magnitude, size, and scale of targeting. What we can tell you is where that's happening, what loss types are being focused, where are they compromising those particular insurance companies. So again, this is the case of one law firm targeting many, but what happens when many target one? And that's what happens here. This is the case where 137 different opportunists, these are law firms, these are contractors, some cases adjusters. We even have cyber criminal groups in this that are spending nearly $60 million collectively to target one company. Each circle represents an opportunist. Within the circle, you see the smaller carrier circles, and it gives us a way to be able to compare apples to oranges in terms of size, scale, and scope. The colors represent the type of opportunist. It could be a law firm or a contractor or somebody else. So it's a way for us to break down this information. So I started with SEO as a foundation because it's really where we have been, but it's not where we're going. And where we're going is AI. And many of us now, when we run searches, we are receiving results coming out of Google Gemini. We might now use GPT, Chat GPT. We might use a collection of different large language models. And the question that we have to ask ourselves when we use these new tools is it accurate information? We like to believe it is, and many of us assume that what we're using is just kind of another index of the internet. But these are now interfaces to the internet, and they represent a new attack surface. And the question becomes is, can this information, can the content inside these large language models be manipulated? We wouldn't be here otherwise if it couldn't. And the reality is this is the next attack surface. We're seeing auto-generated fake websites at remarkable scale. We're seeing AI-generated content in the form of those articles and FAQs and blog articles. Why? Because those search bots can index and search and rank it just as though it was normal content. We see the creation of something called synthetic backlink farms. What is that? Well, we're going to talk about that and what that means to organizations, even bot-enhanced activity to target organizations. So all of these are becoming new different vectors for an organization. The way we like to talk about this, and some of you may have seen this before, is to share examples. And one of the most powerful examples early on in Forewarn's history was one of our clients, the Louisiana Citizens. They're an insurer of last resort. And NPR had written a really nice article about their response to several hurricanes. The article was taken by a group of bad actors in Russia, and they changed the links in that article to be served off of servers from Russia with malware and phishing schemes, and then took the entire article and promoted and backlinked it to the organization, to Louisiana Citizens. Their team inadvertently picked the wrong article. It was spread through social media. It was spread across different channels, thereby exposing individuals to these types of schemes. And the question you have to ask is, well, why would a cyber criminal group from Russia decide to want to target this particular organization? Well, they did it because one of the things that we had started to find is this notion of toxic backlinks. I may link to you and you may link to my business, and that is considered positive link juice. That's a term that's used in the industry to help promote and grow domain authority, our search prevalence and credibility, if you will, in the eyes of search engines. But one of the ways to knock that search credibility down is to suppress it. And one way to do that is through toxic backlinks. If you do this enough times, you can lower the domain authority of a particular company. You do that enough, then you can actually begin to instill and install a campaign that outranks that carrier instead for your own. So you are suppressing one and increasing your other. And that's exactly what started to happen. And when it's done effective, you begin to see other results. And this is an example with FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. On behalf of one of our clients, they had flood claims. We had flood claim policyholders who were filing their flood claims to the wrong FEMA site because the FEMA site was outranked by a group of bad actors. They took they carbon copied FEMA's site, hosted it off of a server in Germany, and people were filing and sending sensitive information, PII, which was being harvested and then resold in the dark web. It's easy to do when you're under a time of stress. If you're a policyholder, would you check that URL, long enough? When you're in that process of trying to file for a claim, that's what bad actors are preying on. But we're also here to talk about AI, and AI in the context of how we're using tools like Google Gemini. And this is the case now with search manipulation. And what we're going to show is how content can be injected into large language models and frankly, change the narrative. And here, I'm sure many of you wouldn't like to have this with your own carrier. This is the case with State Farm. You should avoid giving a statement to a State Farm adjuster without first consulting a lawyer. State Farm may fight to delay payment and question the validity of your injuries. I am confident they didn't write this. And I'm also confident that there were several law firms that were part of this process, because what they've learned in the algorithms with Google and others is that content is being absorbed from the top search positions of search, and it gets ingested into these large language models. So if you're a bad actor and you create content and enough of it effectively to up rank in, it can get ingested into large language models. And so this type of content insertion represents a new form of risk inside AI today.
Todd, Todd,
Yeah.
would you just give some? You've seen this change from your initial findings based on our research project in 2022. Now we're seeing AI being injected. Those companies that were destroyed in 2022, was AI involved at all? That was a human. Now, what's the impact of AI going to be?
Yeah, great. It's a like perfect segue, Joe. I think you must have seen my slide because it really where it's transitioning. This idea of large language model content injection, or what we call prompt injection, we're seeing certainly that. We've all seen synthetic attacks, right? Where it's fake voices, fake IDs, fake pictures, deep fakes, right? That's all happening. But where it's going, the next two are probably the scariest. The first is what I call groupthink. And groupthink is where if you put enough content into a large language model and it starts to spew that back out, it's read by other large language models as a potential source. And you do that enough times with enough large language models, now all of them are having the same type of algorithmic response. And so it's a way to hack the large language models. And so this is currently not solved yet. This is something that we police on behalf of our clients. But the second and probably the most deadly is this notion of ghost GPT. And if there's one thing that I certainly want folks to take away today is that this next attack vector allows criminals and bad folks to take, say, a GPT engine and reskin it, retrain it to do something very malicious. And we're seeing these models be reprogrammed at a very sophisticated level, but then distributed in the dark web so that folks who may not have necessarily deep coding experience or programmatic experience, but want to convert and create some type of hack or some type of fraud can leverage them. And we've tracked this over the period of time. In fact, we use it to track and find individuals as part of the work that we do. But we're seeing, in fact, it's fascinating. There was a service called Telegram. It was actually developed by the founder of the Russian version of Facebook. And so Telegram is kind of like, if you will, like a WhatsApp, a secured messaging tool. Nothing initially nefarious about it. It's just secured messaging, except that it became the de facto standard in the dark web to be sending secured and encrypted messages. It also became the place to be able to distribute models like Ghost GPT. And so this has become one of the problems for cybersecurity and also just for risk officers to understand the inherent side of what's coming for their organization. So with all of this, this is why we created FOREWARN a few years ago, to really get ahead of these types of digital risks. As we said, many times we think of cyber as inward. This is an external type factor, right? These are external forces that are happening on an attack surface using cyber, using SEO, using other means. And so having an understanding of how that can create claims at record volumes, lawsuits at record volumes, really becomes a concern. And to better kind of break this down, FOREWARN synthesizes roughly 750 billion data points from search engines and marketing platforms. We use multiple to be able to triangulate and validate the data. We don't depend on any one. But in turn, we are scanning nearly 20,000 known opportunists in our database across 1,500 companies on a daily basis because we're looking for emerging patterns. We're looking for predicted risk, areas that are evolving and developing. And we put this information up very much similar to the way, say, a federal agency in the cyber world might, in terms of counterintelligence reports and threat intelligence reports and assessments, but also actionable steps to help mitigate and respond to these types of threats. Ultimately, this turns out into the number of use cases, which we won't go into in depth today, but it starts with surveillance. And surveillance means it's looking at things like pre and post cat storm exploitation. How does a storm as an event, get exploited online through search, through advertising, through marketing? There's brand impersonation. There's third-party litigation funding rings, which we'll talk about. There's executive level targeting. I'll give you an example of this recently. A few months back, we actually detected a chief claims officer's home was recorded and shared on YouTube. But that was not all. The individual who posted this hired a criminal group, or maybe he was part of it, hired a group to break into this individual's home Blink system and recorded the fact that every Sunday from 10 to 12, he reads his newspaper in the back porch. So if you would like to take your claim to this address, walk around the backyard. This is where this individual sits. You can then share that information with him about your claim. So this is clearly criminal, but this is what we're trying to scan and get ahead of because, again, it's coming in at a furious rate. What we also want to understand is it just a one-off attacker or are they working in concert? Is there a network of folks working to be able to drive this type of threat? And so once we understand that, this also means how do we as a company respond? As I mentioned earlier, it's not just an IT or CISO response. Marketing has a play in this too. Oftentimes we think of marketing as brand building and a very kind of positive exercise too, but it's also defensive, right? Marketing has a defensive play to shift here. I know, Warner, you've heard me say this before, but if you want to hide a dead body, you put it on page 2 of Google because nobody goes there, right? And it's the same thing. How do we help ensure that your opportunists are moving to those later pages and that you're protecting your brand, that you're protecting what's important on that first page? So there's a digital moat that needs to be built. The last part of this is then measuring what we call your risk score. And we look at this across a number of different vectors, including the individuals that are targeting you, the groups that are targeting you, how they target you, how effective they are, and then what your defenses are like to be able to prevent and protect your organization from this. And we can benchmark this across the industry or industries, depending on the ones that you're in. Ultimately, we put this up into the form of different use cases. Again, I won't go into detail on this, but each department has a different type of use and triage for this information. So I want to use the remaining few minutes just to talk about some specific examples because it's always important to highlight various versions. And so what I want to highlight is a little bit around black hat SEO. Black hat SEO is not one of those items that necessarily lands criminals into prison, but it does require a response by search engines where they will penalize groups from the work that they do that is black hat. And one of the examples that we often talk about is the idea of keyword stuffing. We see some opportunists who will take a keyword, like in this case, USAA, and keyword stuff it into a web page thousands of times to outrank USAA based on a particular subject area. That is considered black hat. We see web cloaking, where they may even take the same keyword and they will use the same font color as the web page color, so it blends in. The human eye won't detect it, but a search bot can. And so, again, another form of black hat SEO. We see fake websites, fake URLs established. We had detected a fake law firm doing a similar response. We had them de-indexed within 12 hours from detection so that more people weren't affected by this. We see semantic deception, meaning they'll take a name like Travelers and they know that maybe people might spell it not with one L but two L's. And so therefore will bid on keywords for search for two L's and also set up a website with the red umbrella to be able to sell you Travelers insurance with two L's. And so we see different iterations of that. We mentioned about some of the backlinks. This is affecting many organizations, including associations. We've even seen situations with search fraud, where many in the industry earlier this year saw the growth in the emergence of Scattered Spider. Scattered Spider is a cyber criminal group that, believe it or not, we had detected nearly a year ago, shared this with our clients, but we see different offspring, different versions of that and manipulating search results from that as well. And of course, content injection. And we see different examples of content injection, not just with Google Gemini, but we see it now with Mode AI, Copilot, and other versions. And in some cases, recommending here are the law firms that you should use if you're going to file a claim or before you talk to that insurance adjuster or claim manager. Maybe you should talk to a law firm. When those backlinks hit, some of those backlinks we investigate because oftentimes they may go to synthetic websites, fake websites, or doppelganger websites. We have a client that had their entire site Carbon Copied, hosted off of a server in Norway, run by a group in Russia again, selling their insurance. They had mimicked their agent login pages as well, all with the idea to solicit information. We had a large national global reinsurer. Same thing. Their site was Carbon Copied, hosted off of a server in the South Pacific, trying to solicit information from carriers that they could then reuse. And then, just as we saw with Louisiana Citizens, again, the whole idea of being able to exploit, to use AI to create these sites very quickly, but also to be able to harvest the information and to resell. The last area is around user-generated content. So we now begin to see the birth of not just social media being used as an outlet to target folks, but to also then create, to have, for example, law firms create campaigns in those media platforms and even use synthetic IDs and voices and so on to reinstantiate, to create more stories, if you will, to create a nefarious storyline and to grow that storyline. We see marketing agencies who are spending millions of dollars on behalf of law firms to create lead generation platforms at scale using AI, and to generate, because it's a money-making and strong business model for many of them. The last area I'll mention is around brand impersonation. Sometimes we see fake law firms or real law firms use the brands of those companies that they're targeting, sometimes pretending to be an extension of them, representing them, even though they're not. And in some cases, we've even seen collusive bidding, meaning we'll see two or three opportunists get together to control search in a particular market. They will outbid anyone else in the market and redirect that traffic to the most appropriate sources, usually their sites. And so we're seeing all these different versions. It's one of the reasons we've actually partnered up with the National Insurance Crime Bureau as well to expand on these discoveries and work to help alert organizations. I'll wrap up with this and then we'll go into some Q&A. Many of us probably have third-party litigation funding on the back of our brains every now and then. None of us, as I mentioned, thought that lawyers would be pawns to these financial chessboards. But in one of the exercises we ran for the Louisiana Department of Insurance, we provide radar for the state. And one of the fascinating experiments, we analyzed over 115 third-party litigation funding groups. These are analyzed and validated by Forewarn. In one particular case, we found a funder who dropped $400 million into 13 law firms. $400 million. The 13 law firms then in turn targeted 66 different unique insurance companies. And I should say there's a couple of transportation companies and a couple rideshare companies in that mix too. They were repeatedly targeted by several, but the uniques were 66. In turn, each law firm generated 31 clicks per each of those 66 companies. And what that translates to is over 27,000 clicks were created that month in 1 month to a case evaluation form, to have another lawsuit started, right, to fill the pipeline. And so this is where the concern happens, right, where we are getting to what Joe was initially showing you. We've always had historical claim frequency, but when it starts to get larger and larger, when we start to see these types of abnormal levels of instigation, this is where this new risk forms. Money into this scheme drives out not only opportunism, in some cases, this leads to fraud as well. And so we track all of these behaviors and relationships as these grow. So just to reiterate, if Joe hadn't called me back in March of 2022, certainly wouldn't be here having this type of conversation. Maybe it would be in a different format. But one of the things that's certainly happening is with AI and the different versions and the attack surfaces that you saw today, we are all trying to pay attention to how this is evolving at such a rapid space. You throw in money into this, and we've seen that go into marketing agencies as well, and to use these AI tools to drive leads. It creates a whole newfound level of risk. So look forward to your questions. I will just wrap up with just saying, when it's done right, and this is an example with the Louisiana Department of Insurance, we've done a lot of work with them. There's some examples out on our website. Happy to have you take a look at. it has an impact to carriers. And we've seen a drop in risk rates for companies like Tower Hill, Louisiana Citizens, and many, many others. Louisiana Citizens in 3 months saved nearly $9 million from the work that they did by reducing their litigation rate. Even SageSure, same thing, been able to reduce their forewarned risk score, drop their litigation risk, drop their false positives. And that's the thing that, we recognize lawyers have an important role to play in this. They absolutely do for policyholders. It's unfortunately, it's always that subset in a population that causes the harm for the entire industry. And that's what we're focused on. We always try to be very careful about what we say on this, because there's always that subset that really, that we need to analyze and investigate. So with that, I'm going to open it up for some questions. I'll turn it back to Werner, and appreciate your time.
Well, thank you very much, Todd. That is an awful lot of information in a very short span of time. I think that's why we have two questions asking, is there going to be a recording or a copy of this presentation, and will the slide deck be available? I believe we will have a recording, and I believe that obviously the slide deck is showing the recording. I'm not sure if we have the slide deck available separately, but
We'll make that available. Yep.
we'll make it available. So my first question is, this is you've been at this since, well, for over 3 years right now, right? And I've seen you've presented, you've got companies that you're working with, but it doesn't seem to me that everybody sort of caught fire with this. I mean, this is very alarming. And if I'm running an insurance company and I see this, I would think, oh, I need to figure out if I'm one of these that's targeted and what can I do? But there's no stampede.
Yeah. 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 It's a great question. And it's one of the most, from our end, because we see the targeting way before it becomes a lawsuit. And we've notified firms of impending engagements, impending lawsuits. And correlation for us is nearly 99+%. And so I think there's several responses to this. I think for smaller companies, they look at it and say, well, we're a smaller brand. We're not a large national. We don't have large volumes or market share. So we're okay. And by the way, maybe our claim frequency is low. Our litigation rates are low. We're in a good standing. Or maybe I'm in Florida and the new laws are helping us. What we can assure organizations is that every company is being targeted. We've seen it in the data. We see it. And what's remarkable is you may not feel it now, but you will feel it later. And in some ways, I compare it to like a burglar system, right? With home security system. We have it running. None of us necessarily want to pay every month for the service. But my gosh, if you're away on vacation and the door opens or a window opens, you are sure grateful that there's an alarm going off and that somebody's going to go over there to take a look. And that's us, right? We feel in many ways that we can get ahead of this, to see the attack surface before it attacks you, to see what's developing, to be alert and to be aware. So that's part one. I think part two is we are also informationally overloaded in our day, and we're trying to prioritize what's important to us, to what to respond to. One of the things that we're trying to help provide is, being able to push this up onto that radar to say, hey, you don't need to worry about all of the other things, but here are a few things you should pay attention to because it's developing. And hopefully that will certainly catch on.
Yeah, Werner, I'll toss this out there too in terms of why there hasn't a stampede. Is I think, well, you've grown up in the industry as I have. We're the most regulated industry in the world, and we play by the Marquis de Queensberry rules, and we can't imagine people cheating like this. And so I use the analogy: we're playing by the Marquis de Queensberry rules, but we're in a street fight. And we need to recognize that it's a street fight. These guys are not playing by the rules. And I think that's something we have to kind of repeat over and over to ourselves, because we do have a regulated industry.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And some of my reactions to these, while I was working in Florida, when you see some of the things that people will do on purpose that harm people,
Yeah.
you just can't believe it. And I think we just believe that we're in a good faith business, and that there's always a little bit of fraud at the periphery, but in general, people that we do business with are good faith, and I think they are now, but they're getting misled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, I mean, you went through a lot of things here, but the bottom line is you're talking about people that are clicking to get to their insurance company, and they get to someone that's pretending to be their insurance company, and they may not have filed a claim in the first. They may be just calling with a question.
Yeah.
Right.
They may be calling to file a claim, but now all of a sudden you've got either a manufactured claim and then a manufactured suit, or just a manufactured suit when there was no need for that in the first place.
Yeah.
And the you mentioned several times the brand impact too. It's policyholders are in enough trouble when they have a claim, enough uncertainty about their insurance company and the claim being paid to add this threat on to them. And the cat catastrophes.
Yeah.
I mean, when you have a catastrophe, you alluded to it, but the thing that we have obviously more cats in more places than we've had in years, and we're struggling with that as an industry. But can you just talk about when a hurricane's moving, or an impending storm is coming, or an event is happening, what these guys are doing, take advantage of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly, as we were showing, in the case of Florida with the hurricane example, where even days before we're seeing websites being set up on and keywords being bid on, and folks, again, filing for lawsuits thinking this is the right thing to do. That's the other part too, is the belief that they're doing the right thing, that they've been educated by a firm saying, file your lawsuit now. On the flip side, what's remarkable, we had a situation even as early as yesterday with a firm down in Florida, similar situation where they're handling now flood claims, water damage rather. And what's fascinating is they have recommendations for contractors on who can help, address these issues. Well, all of a sudden they started to receive a barrage of emails, and in it were reviews of those contractors with deeply low ratings in Google and multiple different platforms in the hundreds. Okay. And as they started to investigate, what they were all pointing to was a recommendation to use a different contractor to the insurance company. And the claims team was looking at this and they were saying, how is this happening? We've worked with this team, these contractors in the past for the last 10 years. All of a sudden, their reviews are negative. Well, it turns out AI was used to fabricate hundreds and hundreds of negative reviews about that company. And as a way, they also then promoted a different contractor. Clearly fraud, clearly activity, but we're seeing different versions of how you can manipulate information like this online, all in the case of an event.
And I think if I may,
Mhm.
one of the things that when you think about the 1-2 punch of billboards, TV, and radio versus the internet, the billboards, TV, and radio, they're desensitizing people that insurance companies are not honest. And so it's a 1-2 punch. All you hear when you drive and you radio is that insurance companies are, out for themselves. Then when you get online, you're quick to make decisions, you're quick to go
Yes.
places. It really is it's a business. It's a business model, and consumers are the ones getting hurt between the cost and the availability issues.
So we have two questions, and I'd like to get them both in here because I think they're really good questions. The first one is, what safeguards can be put in place to fight against this level of fraud? Are there specific actions that insurance carriers can do to proactively curb this nefarious activities?
Yeah, great question. I mean, biasly, I would love to just say, "Hey, look at forewarn," but really, the first step is honestly surveillance, and it's an understanding of how these organizations are leveraging your brand, your keywords, your marketing, and taking advantage. And that's one of the reasons why we look at multiple marketing platforms and tools to analyze. but we also work directly with the search engines. And again, it's one of the reasons why I think we share this. Roughly 750 billion of our data points and signals are coming from those search engines. Our data goes back from 2006 on. So the other side of this is having a historical perspective and context of behavior. If you get involved in forensics in SIU, you need to go back to see how a claim was started, how it was instigated. Those are some areas that are really important for organizations. I think the second part is understanding. We often will see firms fighting a small law firm, and they're dealing with a lawsuit, and they're thinking that maybe this is just another local mom and pop law firm. We're good. What they may not know is where that law firm's connected to. Are they connected to a larger national branded law firm or plaintiff firm, or being funded by a private equity group? They have resources backed behind them. I can't tell you how many times we've seen a large national firm buy a local. They'll keep the brand name the same on the street for a period of time until finally it becomes part of the large national. So many times firms are facing very, very small firms, think law firms, but they're backed by large groups. So having an understanding of these relationships are really important. The last bit I would say is when we look at risk, it's now beginning, and this gets back to Joe's world, looking at the kind of actuarial risk of this type of instigation. How do we begin to think about our reserving strategies for reinsurance? How do we think about how do we protect the risk models for how we're thinking about this? It's not, again, just traditional cyber only. There is a newfound frequency behind this.
No, thank you. And I think that basically what you're saying is need to be aware of this, first of all. And like that claims situation, we don't think that can happen. The first response of the claims department is, I wonder what's happening, right?
Yeah.
So that's probably the start. The other question we have here, and from my experience in Florida, we did have firms that would find certain things that a company might have misstepped, where there was errors in creating a deck page for, the computer wasn't correctly programmed, or certain language in forms. So have you seen any targeting based on holes or opportunities in policy and policy language?
Yeah, that's a big one, is weaknesses in policy provisions and language. We'll see marketing campaigns be driven and then geo-targeted for certain markets and focused on very specific policy holders from a carrier. Oftentimes we'll see one or two claims come in and their tests. And then all of a sudden we'll begin to see a marketing campaign where hundreds to millions of dollars are being spent in a particular market around a set of keywords that are related to that policy provision. That's the type of intelligence to know what's coming down the pathway. That's what we're talking about. It's not only it's using marketing to be aware, but using it as intelligence well ahead of the claims process. And so synthesizing that type of pattern matching and analysis is really critical.
Yeah, I jump on this one a little bit. I think what would be fascinating to me, Werner, would be if the departments and the company believed when the department approved a policy provision that it was intended to avoid a claim or to mitigate a claim, and somehow that policy provision gets beaten in court. Let the companies amend it and endorse policies midterm. So you cut off the tail on having those policies have to be replaced when it comes up. I think that would be an excellent way for a department to say, you know what, we're going to help cut down on this, and by giving you sort of a immediate approval of a policy provision.
Well, I think we're going to have to do things we haven't done in the past.
Yeah.
And certainly Florida has wrestled with how long it takes to make changes effective. Because it's like an 18-month process before you get your filing approved,
Yep.
and then you get it on all your policies, and a lot of damage can be done in a short period of time.
Yep.
Gentlemen, we've covered an awful lot of ground for our viewers. There's a lot here. The recording will be available if you missed any part of the discussion in our on-demand library on the AAIS YouTube channel in the coming weeks. We'll also send a follow-up email with our contact information if you'd like to reach out to us with any questions that we didn't get to address today. And as always, feel free to reach out to our member engagement team at AAIS with any questions you have for more information about AAIS products and services. My parting recommendation is when this becomes available, share it with someone you know that should know about this. We need to get the word out in our industry, and we need to be able to be prepared and handle this as an industry. So that's why we did this webinar, and let's get the word out. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Werner. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Werner.